This video is brought to you by BTI Institute, a New Jersey leader in certification-based management training.
Organizations are embracing agility in a more formal manner, be it Scrum, Kanban, hybrid. People have been a little hesitant over the years, and there are all kinds of anecdotal stories. It's also just dependent on the kind of work you do, whether you're involved in compliance or otherwise. But people are certainly paying attention to agility and more so scaling right now. And it seems it's still a little fuzzy what a Scrum Master does and an Agile coach. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And with those will come some competencies. What are expected of you? What are the skill sets that you have or you carry? We'll talk about those as well. And with that, is there one size fits all? You're going to find a lot of people looking for Agile coaches. You're going to find a lot of people presenting themselves as Agile coaches. But are you making a good choice in picking one for either your team, your program, or your organization? It could be situational, or there could be other things to consider, which we will get into as well. And with that, what should we do? Where do we go from there? Over to you, Bob.
Okay, thanks, Nitin. All right, this comes from the Agile Coaching Institute. If you've been on any presentations or spoken with me at all, and again, I'm Bob Phillips. I'm a very strong proponent of the Agile Coaching Institute. They provide really great training. And this picture shows where a coach fits in. Like there's two levels of coaches. There's a coach that sits at the program level, and there's also a coach that sits at the enterprise level. Now the enterprise level coach actually is responsible for the Agile transformation across the entire organization.
Yeah, I'm on a call, but the thing didn't work.
And an Agile coach is actually responsible at the program level, where basically they may have a number of teams that they're actually helping coach and manage. Where the Agile team facilitator, basically preferably they would have one team. The team facilitator is also known as the Scrum Master. So that's in a big picture as far as the different skills that coaches have. And as you would imagine, an enterprise coach is a very highly skilled coach with many years of experience. A regular coach may have 3 to 5 years, and a team facilitator could be somebody that's just starting off as a Scrum Master or somebody that's more experienced. And what this diagram here is showing is what Lisa Atkins put together, where they could actually put the competencies that are required to be a coach. And as we progress through this presentation, these quadrants are going to be filled in. So everything pretty much, I'm going to be talking about the facilitator portion of it, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nitin for the coaching part of it. So as an Agile team facilitator or Scrum Master, the first competency that the person has to have is they have to really be an Agile lean practitioner. And what that means is they have to really understand what it means to be Agile. They have to really understand what it is to do Scrum and understand why the teams are doing Scrum. This is where somebody new doesn't really totally understand that. And it takes a lot of studying and a lot of experience in order to really grasp these concepts so that you can actually share them with your team. And then the first area of competency is facilitation. And that basically, when you hire a Scrum Master, they're basically responsible for facilitating. That's pretty much what a Scrum Master does, is they would facilitate the Scrum process. And just as a reminder, we'll take a look at Scrum. And if you've been on previous presentations, you've probably seen this before. Scrum is made up of 3 roles, where basically you have a product owner, the dev team, and the Scrum Master. So the Scrum Master, as a facilitator, needs to understand what these 3 roles are and enforce those roles in the process. They need to make sure that there's a product owner. They need to make sure that there's a development team and also a Scrum Master. Sometimes an organization might say, oh, we don't need a Scrum Master. Maybe a PM can do it. And that's where you're basically setting yourself up to fail. And then there's 5 events that make up Scrum. And this is also what the Scrum Master needs to facilitate. The first event is the sprint planning meeting. You need very good, strong facilitation skills in order to coordinate that meeting and make sure that the outcomes and the product owners prepared. So that way the team's ready to, has the work that they need to work on the sprint. The daily Scrum meeting, it's also known as the daily stand-up meeting. That's another event that the Scrum Master could facilitate. The sprint review. This is an event that the Scrum Master needs to facilitate where the dev team actually gets to demonstrate what the team delivered. Also, a best practice would be to get the customer to be part of the demos, because there's nothing better than a customer actually demoing the product that the team just built. The retrospective basically drives the inspection and adaptation. This takes the highest level of skills of a Scrum Master, where basically being able to get the team to actually look back at what they did in the sprint and see what they can do better next time, and actually constantly improve themselves. And then finally, the Scrum itself is an event. And then finally, there's 3 artifacts, and the Scrum Master is responsible for making sure that the artifacts are delivered. The first one is making sure that there's a product backlog. That's, again, working with the product owner to make sure that there's enough work to keep the team busy that provides business value. Then there's sprint backlog. That's actually the backlog that the team volunteers for to work on the sprint. And then finally is the finished product. So basically, as a Scrum Master, your job is to facilitate. That's pretty much what your job is. But that facilitation also includes making sure the process is being followed and that the necessary artifacts and the roles are being filled. And so now, looking at the roles, again, this comes from the Agile Coaching Institute as well. The product owner focuses on the team's purpose, the Scrum Master focuses on the team's autonomy, and the dev team actually does all the work. And then outside the circle, these are all basically people that are part of the Scrum team, is these Agile managers that actually help the development team members facilitate mastery, where basically they would enable them to improve their skills and help to remove blockers for the team and things like that. So those are the roles that are involved. And
so a question, right?
Sure.
And so is the Agile manager the Agile project manager?
No, an Agile manager may be somebody like a development manager, somebody that, because a lot of times the development resources report to a pool, and they might have what they call a development manager. So that's, in that particular screen, that's what the Agile manager is. It's somebody that through HR that the actual dev team members report to. Did that answer your question?
It does, although I thought the Agile teams were supposed to be cross-functional teams, so most of the time they'd come from different managers.
Yes, so there could be more than one manager. There could be 1, 2, 3, depending on where they are. That's correct. So probably this slide should have said Agile manager with parentheses S, because there could be one or it could be many. That is correct.
And if I could just supplement very quickly without getting too much into it. The core of Scrum is very simple. There are only 3 roles. This one here is just showing someone who in the future hopefully is never needed. Organizationally, people are looking into kind of tweaking Scrum a little bit here and there, but it's masking dysfunction. If you have this truly collaborative, cross-functional, empowered team, then you just need those 3 roles. That's all.
Was there any other questions?
What do you mean by protects the team's autonomy? It's above Scrum Master?
Basically, the job of the Scrum Master is to ensure that the team doesn't get outside distractions. Because what will happen is a lot of times people will come in and say, well, can you do this for me? Or can you do that? And so what the Scrum Master job is it's kind of like to put a shield up to keep all the outside distractions away. Their focus is to basically work on the items that they volunteered for in the sprint. And so what the Scrum Master's job is to keep all that outside influence away from them and to enable the team to actually be self-organizing and actually manage themselves and looking out for the process to make sure that the team is following the process. And a lot of times, Scrum Masters don't know when to get out of the way. Actually, when the team's doing everything fine, you kind of just sit back and watch. and then you basically just come in and out depending on, you know, what's going on. Sometimes team members may have some disagreements. You might have to facilitate those types of disagreements among members because you want to keep the morale really high. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, so
And we will have some time for Q&A at the end as well.
and I'm going to launch a poll right now real quick, and it should come up in your screen. The first question is, what is the Scrum Master responsible for when they work with their Scrum team? And basically, this is a multiple choice. And then the second one is for Nitin and I to let us know how things are going, because right now, you know, we're only a little over 10 minutes into the meeting. We can quickly change and, you know, make it the way you'd like it. And I'm seeing we have 24 people here, and I've seen about 19, 21, 60. It's looking good. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on this. All right, so the people that we're doing okay with is if we're not covering something in more detail, please, you know, feel free to ask. You know, we want to make this an interactive presentation, and so that you get the most out of it as possible.
One question: in a typical organization, Scrum Master would report to whom? Like a PMO or Agile PMO or the development managers or line managers?
You want to avoid that. Again, there's what's best and what's reality. A lot of times the Scrum Master will report to the line managers on the development team, or they might report to the project management PMO. But ideally, you want the Scrum Master to report to the Agile organization. Like if your business is truly going through a transformation, the Scrum Master should end up reporting into the Agile office, basically, where basically they would have coaches and Scrum Masters that would be dispersed throughout your organization. So okay. It depends on where you are in your transformation.
Also, just keep in mind, Scrum Masters are servant leaders. They're there to serve three entities: the dev team, the product owner, and the organization. Scrum isn't keeping reporting about the Scrum Master intentionally. They're keeping it out of the Scrum Guide. So just a philosophical statement there and something to think about.
Okay.
And so let's see, we've got a poll here, some results.
So Nitin, you have a little work cut out for you, because basically some people think Scrum Masters do more than facilitation. So that's where Nitin will help you now with what the coach does. And thank you again for your feedback, and anything we could do along the way, just let us know. So Nitin, I will now go to the next slide.
Thanks, Bob. So along with the roles, there's something else happening, at least with the competency. So besides facilitation, there's something else that you dance with as an Agile coach. So there is some training and education, there is some mentoring, and then there is some professional coaching as well. And as these start popping into the grid, we'll touch upon these a little bit more. So again, when you say, hey, what does an Agile coach do? Or if you're ever interviewing with someone, I would just keep my ears open for these 4 items for sure.
And to add to that, this is part of the competency framework. So I covered the Scrum Master portion of a facilitation. Now Nitin's touching on the areas that make up a coach.
Yep. So we just went over this, just a typical Scrum team. And we also know the 3 core and simple roles. And there's someone on the outside as well. And this gets into the Agile coach role. Agile coaches are there to focus on something else. So let's get into that a little bit more. Next slide. Here's an example. Let's just pick a scenario. You know, you have some members of the dev team that are not meeting consistently at the daily Scrum. I mean, by very definition, it's daily. So you should be doing that every day. So how would we approach this? Or how could we approach this? Now, if I were teaching, I might just have a one-on-one, have a session and say, hey, the purpose of the everyday meetup is blah, 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 and explain it to them. That's the teaching stance. I could also facilitate, which Bob has gone over a little bit, saying, hey, allow me to just get people together in a room and help them answer 3 questions. That's a different stance. Mentoring. Mentoring is being a storyteller, bringing your experiences from earlier engagements or other teams. And this may or may not serve the immediate team that you're working with or the situation at hand, but it's just something that people could reflect upon or compare if they needed to. And lastly, true professional coaching is having something open-ended. What does this team want to do when this happens? And we talk about self-organizing, which again has not been defined in any artifact like the Scrum Guide. The industry and thought leaders talk about conflict resolution models, team norms, and team agreements. And a coach can help build and weave those in as well. In this stance, we're not being judgmental. We're not saying we're an expert. We're just staying in a place of curiosity and seeing what happens. So again, in any scenario, and this is very common, you can take any of these 4 stances, and that's what an Agile coach should be competent in and be familiar with, weaving and dancing between or amongst all 4 of these. So going ahead, what does a professional coach do? Forget Agile for a moment, forget Scrum, forget Kanban or any other flavors. When you're a coach, you are taking a neutral stance for your client's agenda and perhaps a team's agenda. And you're really staying present, as in trying to hear what it is that they need or where they're coming from. And you're just going to help reflect that, unfold what's going on. There's an expression, fish don't notice water, right? It's just possible that because of the cultural dynamics of the organization, people sometimes are not aware of what's going on or how they function. This could be very different, for example, from a nonprofit organization that's very much open in conversations and what happens to, let's say, a traditional banking or financial institution, where some people have a difficult time saying no or pushing back. And eventually, you want to outsource yourself or be outsourced. If you can truly empower your teams and members who are overlooking a transformation, then you're not going to be needed. So how do we distinguish between an Agile coach? Again, the Agile coach is going to be able to distinguish between such competencies as we just talked about. And not only that, again, remind yourself, they are truly an outsider for the Scrum team. And this is an interesting yet delicate balance. Do you truly trust the teams that you're helping? What are the boundaries? What is it that you're going to do to step in or step back? So I'm going to talk about another coaching model. This is something called the Strengths Finder. This is something based on a psychological profile based on your strengths, as it says. A lot of people get a little nerved talking about, hey, you're prodding into, my mindset and probing, and people are sensitive. This is really based on a positive. They say there are 2 sides of a coin. A lot of times in interviews, you hear people saying, hey, tell us your weaknesses. But maybe you should also ask, what are your strengths? And could we leverage them once identified? And if you could do that for an individual, you could also do that collectively for a group or a team. The authors and the originators, Dr. Clifton, and now continued by Tom Roth. And there's over 4 decades of research behind this. It's very interesting. And I'm going to give you an example here. I worked with a team where there were 6 members therein, including myself. And all we were trying to do is say, what are your strengths? the broad buckets here are in execution, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. All the members had 5 top strengths identified. So if you could follow team member 1, they were a great achiever and had some execution skills. Number 2 showed something in strategic thinking. That's context. Relationship building was number 3, individualization. Empathy was number 4, and input as a strategic thinker. Some of these are very simple or you could grasp, but there's a lot of depth in these. Broadly speaking, this person was in quite a bit of the spectrum, but if you notice, they weren't very good at influencing. It wasn't their strength. Likewise, team members 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, they're all kind of spread out. So let's try to focus on one individual and see what's going to happen. I'm looking at team member 2 now and saying, okay, they have some strengths in influencing. They have some strengths in strategic thinking. But it seems there isn't a lot going on in the execution or the relationship building. So when I saw this, I simply asked the team members, what do you think would happen if this person won the lottery or was on vacation for 2 weeks? And this is an open question I can pose here as well. Given this model, does anybody have a thought or two they would like to share? What would happen to this team if this member disappeared?
It looks like all communications will be lost, right? Because this team member seems to influence the communication.
Yes, you actually hit the nail on the head. Anybody else have any thoughts or opinion? Although I've kind of given it away a little bit.
We'd lose direction on this because it looks like he's strategic as well as influencing.
Could be, very much so, yes.
I would say it is more like a risk.
You risk, and how so? Tell me more.
Yeah, but losing a key personnel, team member is part of the risk.
Also, the overall picture that, hey, it's supposed to be a cross-functional team, self-organizing, collaborative, and a piece of it suddenly disappears for 2 weeks. Okay.
It affects the velocity and the capacity, basically.
It might, yes, indeed. Sometimes you'd be surprised when you have a member disappear, velocity and productivity goes up.
He's also the only one creating ideas.
Could be, yeah.
Or people become more creative. Or maybe they bond together and try to make up the slack.
Yeah, that happens as well.
That's true.
And I see something on a text. Team member 2 is the only communicator. So, big issue? Question mark? Yeah. And with communication, I heard this big echo coming in right out there. Very timely message. All right, so let me take over. These are all good points. And I think given this simple model that you've seen just for a couple of minutes, you're right on. Team member 2 had skills in influencing, was a negotiator, had business analysis skills. And as you can see, in just the influencing bucket, that's the orange, he's the only member there who has these strengths, right? And if he were to go away, the team is going to have trouble with negotiations, charm, maybe some things with scope of things. And when it comes to strategic thinking, that's a little secondary in my mind because there are other team members who could pick up in that area. But the main thing is for this team is, and if again you would have reflected saying, hey, you're going to either have to figure out a way to either facilitate or negotiate or talk to stakeholders so that everything is kosher or you're protected. Or in the future as well, if you were to hire somebody and bring into this team, would you like somebody who could possibly be a little bit more charming or have that influencing as well? And think about that. So this tool not only was sticky and well-meaning to an individual, they could see how the team dynamics was, and they had never seen anything like this. And this is what an Agile coach is doing, simply revealing the system. How is this team working? Because every team is different from the other. Even if you're in the same organization and even if you have a large department, people have different flavors of personalities. Show them what that is and give them a language where they can talk to. I'm going to quickly go to the chat and then let's go.
And then while you're doing that, would you put their actual names on this in real life to let everybody?
I would not, just for confidential reasons.
Okay.
If anybody wants to guess mine, they can. Ronnie asked, is this a typical tool used by Agile teams to onboard team members? No, unfortunately, it's not a typical tool. It's an Agile tool that I have used with several teams and it's worked really well. And this is what an Agile coach should be doing, bringing in some model that would be welcome. This costs maybe $20 per person and discounted it's $10 per person. So if you're ever concerned about budget, just tell people, hey, it's really not a lot of money. So this is how it is. There's a whole book behind it. There's a big philosophy behind it. So just Google StrengthsFinder or reach out to me. I'll tell you more about this. And oh yeah, very quickly, I think Sunil asked, it's an online, about 20-minute multiple choice scenario or yes, no. So you go in 20 minutes and it will ask you questions like, would you prefer watching a movie or reading a book? That's it.
Is this a StrengthsFinder book?
There is.
Yeah.
Which has a code as well to it. So that's StrengthsFinder. And hey, I think everybody could really relate to this. Let's move on, Bob. Let's see what's next. So again, this could be used for several teams across the organization, and it's bringing a lot of awareness. And again, this isn't really teaching, facilitating, or mentoring. This is a flavor of coaching. Next, Bob. And again, there's nothing specific on Agile practices on StrengthsFinder. You could use this with teenagers, with community issues, with leaders, with children 10 years and above of age. Yet, for me as a coach, I weaved it into Agile practices. But it's very interesting. As a coach, you could use it in different scenarios. Okay, next. So again, we've talked about a little bit of coaching, mentoring, teaching, and Bob went over facilitation. Underneath, there are three broad buckets. Transformation mastery is what an Agile coach would bring. This gets into organizational design, understanding the culture, the norms. And next to that, there's also business mastery. This is very good if you have domain knowledge. So if you've been with a company for a long time, a lot of the East Coast is in life sciences, with insurance. There is a richness and wealth of knowledge that an outsider cannot necessarily bring. So if you understand the business, that's only going to be in your favor. And lastly, you have technical mastery. This is where good engineering practices come into place, like continuous integration, continuous design, test-driven development. So along with the competencies that have been discussed, you need to have a coach that falls into one of these buckets or can reach out if they need help with from others. Bob, you and I've got similar backgrounds, but different stories as well. What do you think about these three buckets?
These three buckets, a lot of people get confused a little. Sometimes they think a coach is supposed to do all three, but usually an organization would hire three separate people. One person would be actually the coach leading the Agile transformation at the organization level. And then it would be a combination of business and technical people, as far as technical coaches, helping the individual programs and teams, depending on, you know, what the product owners are trying to drive and what kind of business outcomes they're looking for. And so where I've been pretty much in my career is I would love to be able to say I have the technical mastery, but I always reach out to the technical teams to do that, because the technical mastery includes like setting up Jenkins, doing continuous integration, the Git repository, those types of tools. A technical mastery coach would actually be help the team with them. They would also help them with test-driven development. And so basically, I live in business and I'm kind of leaning toward transformation, but you know, there's a lot to learn in order to actually be that true enterprise transformation coach.
Okay, and so you're saying that, I guess I'm a little lost. It's an agile coach should also be a technical master and also be a DevOps master too at the same time?
No, that could be one of their skills. Basically, if you're an agile coach and you bring in technical mastery, like one of the persons at my organization where I work, he brings in technical mastery. He'll actually roll up his sleeves and start coding, okay? But he's also an expert with test-driven development. He's an expert when it comes to Git and Jenkins. So that's just one role. I'm not saying that you have to fill that, but that person is out there, you know, that your organization could hire. But I know I am not that person. You know, I'm more on the business side, but there are technical people that do coach in that area.
Yeah, because the impression.
Adding value.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. It's like adding value. You know, if you have extra skills.
Oh,
yeah, I understand that part, right? On the adding value and the extra skills, right? But I thought the Scrum Master and the Agile coach, right, were more process oriented, right, than technical content oriented.
Okay, that's only one coach. You can be a coach and not have the technical piece. You can be a coach and have the business piece. You just be one of these three. You either do the organization transformation, do the business, or do technical. It's one or the other. You don't do all three. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and maybe I could say it in a different way, because again, it might be different opinions, but you might bring an agile coach that has no technical mastery or technical skills or doesn't have much to do with engineering practices, and that's fine too. The need of the organization might be something else at that junction. They might need somebody to go from, hey, we're a typical waterfall company and we're moving into the Scrummy area. That's a little bit of the transformation mastery. It could be you have a team that's already ventured into the Scrummy area and they're saying, you know what, this works well for this department, but we're marketing. We're not sure how this would work in the business function over here. And that's maybe the business mastery. Then you could have certain teams or companies making more technical products that are heavily dependent on code. So their code is their life, and their code is the bread and butter and has to be clean, efficient, deployable at an instant, maybe multiple times a day. And that's where the technical mastery comes in. So again, an agile coach may not get you any technical skill sets or the value add, as Chris was saying, but at least this is a model just giving an awareness of those three buckets. So I don't know if I'm adding clarity or more confusion or things to think about.
Yeah, I guess the model will depend on the organization, right? Because I can see somebody getting too involved in something technical and not having time to do the actual coaching, right? That's required.
Correct. It depends on your immediate need. It depends on where you are in your spectrum of your journey. And you might just say, hey, we're just doing an initial adoption. I don't think we need to go too technical right now. Let's just figure out if people are willing to do an experiment and do one project with Scrum, with one team. And let's see what that looks like.
It seems to me that probably transformation mastery would be the most important aspect for coaching because it is sort of a transformation journey in most of the cases. Is that right? Or
it is situational, but I would just bring my personal experience and agree. A lot of people I work with are doing initial adoptions before getting into transformations. And the technical mastery will supplement and come later. It's easier to, or at least see people's behavior openly rather than investigate code, which you may or may not understand as an agile coach. I have a former development background, but yes, the transformation and the mindset and the philosophy and the values, that usually comes first based on what I've seen.
okay, thank you.
And at that, a coach at that level is very highly skilled because you're dealing with, high-level executives within the company, helping them understand, what Agile is and how it's going to help their organization. And then you're also helping the coaches that are actually on the lines, working with the dev team. So that's a very, very highly skilled person that does transformation.
Thanks.
All right, Bob, shall we move ahead?
Yes.
So, okay, a lot of good discussions. How do you pick an agile coach?
Okay, can I ask one more question right before you go to how to pick a coach?
Sure, very quickly.
Right, and so I know that the PMI is offering some safe training now, right? And I know that there's the release train engineer, right? Who's
the RTE, yes.
The RTE, right? Who's supposed to be the coach, right, for the Scrum Masters, at least from what I read, right, to help with the coaching of the Scrum Masters and the team, right? And so how does that and the Agile coach fit together?
I would question that a little bit to the RTE or observe whether the RTE can do a dance between these four things that we have discussed. So is the RTE staying present as a professional coach, seeing where people are headed next? Or is the RTE more of an educator, talking about the cadence, when we meet, so on, facilitating, or mentoring? So it doesn't matter what your title is, it doesn't matter what your label is, it's really what are the competencies that you bring. And these are those four there. So without truly answering your question, it's a little bit more philosophical.
Yeah, what Michael brought up is a term used in the Scaled Agile framework. It's different from just regular Scrum. So regular Scrum used on small teams, like about 6 to 8 people, and the train engineer is kind of basically a Scrum Master, but for the enterprise size of a team.
Yeah.
I have a question. Just want to understand a day in life of an Agile coach. Let's say an organization is starting on Agile transformation journey. So what would be a day in life for a coach?
I wouldn't answer that till the end of the presentation. Let's hold off a little bit on that. I don't think there would be a typical day because it depends on the organization, what they're doing and their needs. I've done a few adoptions, but let's talk a little bit at the end.
Okay.
So getting back to picking an Agile coach, the usual, I put it in 2 buckets. Someone familiar with the industry, has domain knowledge, familiar with a multitude of Agile practices. Doesn't have to be Scrum, could be Kanban, Lean, other things. And within your budget, every organization's got a different budget. Now, if it's situational, you have to figure out, are you working with individuals, teams, or the entire organization? Are you doing an adoption that's smaller in size and scale, but perhaps one initiative? Or are you working at a program level or beyond? So that's a bit of the situational. But at a higher standard, when you get into true coaching, you need somebody who can reveal things and it's just a change agent. You need somebody who is happy to empower others and take joy in seeing others succeed. And not only that, it's almost like being a team shrink in some ways. You have good self-awareness skills, you're empathetic, And you can navigate conflict as well, because Scrum or any kind of agile practice bringing in change can be intimidating to a team as well as an organization. So till that do us part? No, not really. Just help the people and then move on to something else. Trust the people to make the decisions and move on ahead. Just these are a few thoughts on how you pick somebody. So is there a one size fits all? Bob is going to talk a little bit more about that.
As we've basically, been talking throughout this presentation, there's really not one size that does fit all. Me, Bob, my preference is I really enjoy working with teams. That's where I like to be. I defer the executive discussions with the other coaches, because to me, working with the team and helping them and their Scrum Master actually move forward and actually become these highly desired, high-performing teams, to me is the most wonderful part of being a coach. So did you have anything you want to add, Nitin? Okay, good. All right. Were there any questions about the coach and all that? I know you guys asked along the way. And so now, this is, I went through the Agile Coaching Institute. They have a coaching competency cohort program where it's a year-long program, and you get to work with really great people. And this is Mike Edwards, David Chilcott, and Lisa Atkins. Lisa, on the right, she wrote Coaching Agile Teams. And as you can see here on the floor is the coaching competency framework that Nitin and I just shared with you. And when you do this, what's really fun is you can actually put this up on the floor in a room with these cards, and you have people go around that are participating and say, where are you comfortable? Or you can actually have people role model. Okay, when I'm facilitating, I do this. When I'm coaching, I do that. There's a lot of things you can do with this, and you get your people in your room moving around. And what I want to point out here is there's this concept called Integral Agile. And this is something where it kind of expands the coaching framework, where you can actually look at 4 different areas of how your teams are performing. Because like a lot of times when I talk to an organization, they're not really sure how their teams are actually, they say they're agile teams, but they're not really sure how well they're doing. And so what this Integral Agile provides is just a way for you to look at that team. And so I just wanted to touch on this. Again, we're not going to go into detail, but I just wanted to make you aware that there's this, that's what's really fun about this space. There's so much more you can learn just by, opening a book and stuff like this. So I'm just going to walk through each of the quadrants really quickly, because we do want to end by 7 o'clock and leave time for questions. So let's get started. All right, so now basically here's the framework. And now what's happened is they added these quadrants, and like the I is like the mindset. And like, how is the team's mindset? And what's really interesting is how these quadrants align with the different competencies. So actually a coach would help with the team's mindset. And then a coach has to be definitely an agile lean practitioner. And basically, how are they, is the team working by agile values and principles? Does the team trust each other? Is there low trust or high trust in the organization? So that's the I space. And what you can do is basically work with the organization and come up with ways you want to evaluate your team. So that way you can look across all your teams and see how they're doing in each of these areas. And then basically you can pinpoint the areas you want to improve on. So the next space is behavior. And that's basically, that has to do with the practices and the roles. And if you notice, behavior touches mentoring and the agile lead practitioner. And so basically, this is how is the team doing all the Scrum ceremonies? Are they skipping the retrospective? Are they doing the daily Scrum? Are their daily Scrum meetings 60 minutes long when they should only be 15 minutes? These are all behavioral things that you should be looking at across your teams. The next area is the we, and that has to do with team relationships and customs. Does the team celebrate victories? Do they laugh? Do they protect each other? Do they help each other when people need help? These are all culture aspects. And this touches on the transformation mastery skill, a little bit of the business, and a little bit, and also facilitation. And then finally, the ITS, which is systems. And basically this is the environment. Are they co-located? Do they have the tools that they need? And basically, is the culture in the organization, do they reward experimentation? Do they appreciate that? And that touches on teaching, technical mastery, and the business. So again, I just want to put this out there. And I know, we're sharing a lot of information with you, but there's so much more that you can do with this framework that I just showed. And then there's one last slide I wanted to put up before we end. What happened back in 1985, Lisa came up with this competency framework, and she's had countless numbers of classes. And if you notice, these areas are in different spots on the screen. And so what Lisa did and the Agile Coaching Institute is they actually move these areas around so that they align up better with the Integral Agile. So now basically what they did is they moved professional coaching so that it touched on the I quadrant, because basically professional coaching touches the mindset. Then they moved mentoring so it touches the IT quadrant, because that basically has to do with the practices and the roles, and that's where you would mentor people. Then they moved facilitation to the cultural piece of it, and that's basically because that has to do with how the team is working together, what's their customs, how are they celebrating. So that all has to do with how things are being facilitated. And then finally, they move teaching over to the ITS quadrant, which is the environment, and that's where teaching is required. So I wanted to share this with you only because I think it really reinforces how the different coaching competencies tie into the Integral Agile. Was there any questions? And then the last thing, they did flip transformation and technical as well, as far as the key coaching areas. And then basically we asked Lisa why she didn't change it, and she said it was because it's been documented and it's in so many places that she didn't want to bother to change it. But this is the actual competency framework that aligns with Integral Agile.
So Bob, very quickly, if I could just go back and just say it a different way. If I could just pick any one color, let's say the orange, it's where the systems is. That's where there'll be a lot of the teaching, the technical mastery, and a little bit of the business mastery.
Right.
Right. So if you have a team or an organization heavy into some systems, then that's where you should probably think about getting an Agile coach with a lot of technical mastery. But if it's maybe a transformation or something, then it's more on the cultural side of it. That's the we part of it.
Yes.
Okay, so can we have access to that framework slide?
Yes, we're going to post the deck
okay.
on the PMI New Jersey website along with this recording.
Okay, thank you.
It'll be available probably by the end of the week, depending on how busy John Buffy is. And now to summarize, go ahead, Nitin.
One question there for you. Any guidelines or tips for global teams when team members most likely will never meet?
Yes, Phil, I was just seeing that on the chat. I think you need a Scrum Master who can facilitate a few things, those being your team agreements and norms. How do we want to agree on communication? How do we want to agree to being disturbed? You need to just bring the people in together, facilitate that, and at the same time, take a small step back over there. It's never ideal, although we are a global economy. You want to get people to work face-to-face if possible. Sometimes technology helps with webcams. So it's never a good solution to things, but certainly facilitate the agreements.
It's like rules of engagement.
Yeah, you could call it rules of engagement, call it whatever you want, but it's just, hey, if you're doing Scrum, we know we have to meet every day for about 15 minutes as a checkpoint. When does the team want to meet? Have that discussion. It's okay, given that, we're kind of scattered, it could be different time zones, different states, different countries. How do we want to make this work? So you're taking a bit of a neutral stand and letting the team decide how to work through that dynamic, and then figuring out how to keep themselves accountable. And then really, if needed, stepping in. So again, as much as it's self-organizing, give them what we call some guardrails and parameters and just work through that.
And also, depending on your situation, like where I work, we have teams in Pune and Chennai, and our teams are big enough in Pune that they have their own Scrum Master. And then, we have Scrum Masters here in New Jersey. And so basically, that's how the teams actually, the teams work together during the sprint. And it helps a little bit with the, being so distributed. Because the team is self-contained in each location and they can work together. That's just one way of doing it.
And so, Bob, do you guys have a scrum of scrums? Somehow for the scrum teams to align, or how do you manage that?
We don't have that. We like on one particular project that I just talked about, we had 2 teams in Pune and 2 teams in New Jersey, and so we basically just through the communication with the Scrum Masters, we kept everything, up to date. Everybody jointly participated during the sprint planning sessions. And then each team would then, after sprint planning, we do a planning session 2, where the teams would then volunteer to do the work. And then based on that, the Scrum Masters would touch base to make sure everything's aligned. And then we would also, like in the middle of each week, like if we did a 2 or 3 week sprint, we would get together with both teams, early in the morning in the US, so that we could talk to people in Pune before it gets too late. We would then talk and see if there's any technical things going on. We also had that kind of meeting as like the next day of the sprint, where basically we had, everybody, both teams would attend, everybody talk about what they're doing and answer any kind of questions. So there are ways to deal with it, but there's nothing better than having everybody in one location, but that's not reality. Did that answer your question?
Because I already deal with something similar, so I was just trying to see how other people have to deal with it.
Yeah, if I could also chime in a little bit. When I hear Scrum of Scrums, I'm actually hearing 2 things and 2 definitions. And this gets very interesting. The Scrum of Scrums that I was made familiar with initially by a mentor was quite simply, when you have larger teams and more teams rather, you want to give them an opportunity to engage with each other at some point, and don't get the Scrum Master there at all. Let the actual worker bees be the ones talking to each other. There's another definition of Scrum of Scrums that evolved, and I'm just saying this out as awareness, where Scrum Masters also engage. And to me, that's a bit of a dysfunction. So just be a little careful, and when you say Scrum of Scrums, what are you proposing and what are you taking on? If you are a Scrum Master, maybe you're trying to help out, but again, know a little bit of your boundaries and you want to empower your team. So just keep that in mind. Scrum of Scrum has 2 definitions that I know of that have come about quite recently. And also just looking at the chat a little bit, Slava is proposing, have a team lead on remote teams so they can kind of filter the things. Just be a little cautious there, because if, again, I'm using Scrum as reference, Scrum does not recognize titles or seniority or leads. They just say members of a dev team.
Yeah, what I mean is that, sorry for interrupting.
Go ahead.
What I meant is that I like my remote team, for example, in a different country consists of 6 developers. So I would not actually talk to them throughout the Scrum, but I would have a representative of the team who would manage them locally and give me updates during daily 15 meeting Scrum. So they will be actually focused on work, and we'll have uninterrupted 2 weeks of work.
Yeah, I would say I think you've had some conversations to get to those agreements, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
I would push the boundaries a little bit if you wanted to see if you could rotate that ever once in a while so that you have a different member come in. But that again depends on your team, and I'm just throwing that out there as a thought or a seed. And there's some benefits to that as much as there might be pain points. But hey, if you've got something working, that means you've had those conversations and you've reached some agreements. And that's the key thing. We might have different approaches, but you need to have some agreements at the onset.
I agree, yes. Thank you.
One more thing, the Scrum of Scrums, does it have, is it time bound or?
Yes, if you're considering any event in Scrum, although Scrum, again, doesn't officially recognize a Scrum of Scrum, it should have a time box, otherwise it'll go on endlessly.
How do you determine? It's a 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or it just, again, it's based on the agreement?
I won't prescribe to that. I'll let you figure it out. You should just, as a facilitator or a coach, say, I wonder how long this should be, and see what happens.
Can start with 15 minutes, see what happens.
Yeah. And so I think the Scrum of Scrum concept, right, was from the LESS framework.
Perhaps even earlier.
I have one more thing to add for the Scrum events.
Can everybody not talking go on mute?
Oh. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, Chris, go ahead now. There's no echo. And this will be the last question before we wrap up for the thing. Go ahead, Chris.
We have a process called as backlog grooming, right? Backlog refinement, sorry. No more grooming anymore. Refinement. It normally happens in the middle of a sprint.
I'm sorry, I'm going to mute everybody. So if you want to talk, you have to unmute yourself. So Nitin, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I don't think that was Nitin. That was somebody else asking a question.
Okay, I know where Chris is going with this. Very quickly, I'll touch upon this before we wrap it up, but we'll still open up for questions. Scrum does talk about refinement, and I think it says no more than 10% of capacity. When it happens, ask the team, hey, when do you want to meet? That's the facilitation stance. If you say,
normally, doesn't it happen during the middle of the sprint? Because, for the next sprint, you're keeping everything, ready and done status just to make sure it goes smooth for the next sprint. It happens in the middle of the previous sprint, somewhere around that time, just to make sure.
Yeah, and as I thought, my understanding was that the product owner owned refining the backlog, right? The Scrum Master was just there to coach the product owner in case the product owner needed some Scrum, some Scrum ceremonies or processes to follow.
But don't you involve a team to refine too? You need the.
This is a great discussion. We should end the meeting, and then Nitin and I are going to stay on for another 15 minutes. But people may want to just see the end and then drop. So if you're, we can definitely continue this after the meeting's over.
Okay.
Hey, Bob.
It is 7:03. I apologize for going 3 minutes over. So we can now say that we're concluding the session on the role of a Scrum Master and Coach. And we're now going to be open for any kind of questions. Anybody that has a question or just wants to listen, you're more than welcome. I'm going to turn the recording off now. And again, thank you everybody for joining.
Bob, can you keep the recording on?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, keep the recording on, and and we'll decide whether we cut it out or whatever. Just
okay.
Thanks.
So maybe I can chime in a little bit. We were talking, Chris may have dropped a little bit on when it is normal to have the refinement or who owns that, because we're getting a little into Scrum practices now. I married a psychologist. Sometimes I get confused what's normal or abnormal. I think she's part psychic. I'll get off the couch and she'll say, "You're going to make a cup of tea now, aren't you?" I say, "Yeah." "Could you make one for me too, honey?" I'm like, "Yeah, but how did you know that? Go back a step." And that's into patterns. When refining happens, ask the team, "Hey, when do you want to meet?" As a general thing, not towards the end because people are scrambling to finish up and work towards their goal. Not too early either. Somewhere in the middle is just my thought and opinion. But it's really up to the team. And again, if you're a Scrum Master, you're facilitating that. And if you're a coach, you're empowering the team to make those decisions. Who owns refining? It's just something Scrum says refining happens along the way. The product owner is responsible for the product backlog because a lot of people can add to the visible and open product backlog. But ultimately, the single wringable neck, as Ken Traber said, is the product owner, including for the increment. So those are getting a little bit into the practices of Scrum. I know we had a question earlier on, moving on to what might a typical day look like for an Agile coach. I don't remember who asked that or if the person is still about, or we'd like to try to answer that now. Or see if there's an interest for that, or see if there are other questions.
Yeah, I guess you could. I don't know whether I think it was it Rebecca or someone who was asking that, who might be gone.
Could be. If I just wanted to see if there's still curiosity, because we can touch a little bit about that as well.
If nobody has anything else, I'll listen. You can go ahead.
Okay. I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'm sure Bob will have stories as well. So I've been engaged with a few Agile adoptions, and they've been very different. So it depends on the company size, the culture, whether they're engaging for one initiative, for the one team, or multiple teams at a program level. These are just the different scenarios that I encountered. As an Agile coach, one of the first things that I do is something called designing the alliance or getting to some team agreements. And it's as simple as, hey, how do you want to work with me? And it's an odd question to some people because they've not been asked that. And that leads to some conversation and say, how does that look like? What are some examples like? And it gets to be in a place of curiosity. How can I disturb you? How do we deal with emergencies? How do we deal with conflict? So it's not to do with the immediate initiative. It's not to do with the project, but it's setting up something that's going to help you along the way. Once you get some agreements in place, then you can get a little bit more mechanical. You're probably going to be working one-on-one with team members, seeing what's going on, to working with the Scrum Masters, empowering them, to working with executives if it's at that level. But as a coach, you certainly want to have some agreements in place and encourage that of your Scrum Masters so that they can then move that and weave them into their team as well. Bob, any thoughts, insights, other stories?
Sure. Where I've been seeing is the coaches do a lot of work with Scrum Masters, helping the Scrum Masters facilitate the process. I see coaches doing a lot of training. And when I was on my previous project, I did a lot of mentoring of the team in Pune. They were basically a much younger team, and the New Jersey team was much more experienced. So basically, I would set up mentoring sessions, I would set up training sessions, and just to help them along so that their Agile journey, because everybody's always at a different point in their Agile journey. And right now, I'm engaging some other teams, and I'm just at a point where I have my own team, but there's additional teams that definitely could use some help. And right now, I'm trying to figure out how I can actually start helping without stepping on toes, because a lot of it's very political. Nobody really wants to be told that they're doing it wrong. So you have to be very, very careful, how you say stuff, because the worst thing you could do is you can insult people, and then your job is like 100 times harder. So you really want to just go in there and just come in as a friend and nicely tell them you're not quite doing it right, and just somehow help them figure. You have to kind of help them figure it out how to do it the right way by just give me some examples like, hey, why don't we try it this way? Those types of things. And that to me is what makes the coaching job really fun.
And maybe to supplement what you just said, Bob, and maybe an initial conversation with people, just say, is it okay if I correct you at times? Or, and how can I correct you? You know, what would that be look like? So some people will say, you know, just be a little gentle, you know, don't give me a shock. Or someone will say, just say it as it is, man. We need to be held accountable and everybody needs to be done that. Okay, so everyone's going to have a flavor of how they want to be corrected. So it's an open-ended question which will reveal, and then you work with that.
Okay, so I think back to Revika's question, right? What would be like your daily activity in terms of what? And so as an agile coach, right? You're gonna attend all the sprint, you know, the daily stand-up meetings, right? And observe, right? And based on that, you know, decide who you're gonna pull aside and coach and mentor.
If I could start with that, there's certainly some shadowing and observation. You need as a coach just to figure out what's going on today. Is it, for example, a team that's already started with something scrummy? There was a team, for example, I was working with that had been trying Scrum for just over a year and they were struggling. And then in contrast, at another organization, there was a team that had never ventured into it. And they were really wanting to see, how do we do it? Tell us what to do. So there's the shu-ha-ri as an analogy or example they use in martial arts. The shu is to tell me what to do. You know, I don't know anything. The ha is figuring things out and experimenting, and the ri is mastery. So to your point in that example, if you go about observing things, have some agreements there saying, hey, I'll be observing, and if I need to pull people aside, I'll be doing it, or could I step in the middle? And then you kind of dance. Again, you need your agreements in place. If you're going to be stepping in, then people need to understand that and see what role you're playing. Oftentimes that has happened with my engagements. And there are times when, let's say the daily scrum is over, I might do a one-on-one with people. And there are also the retrospectives as well. That's another opportunity to bring what you observed to light and say, hey, I noticed this during the scrum and I was just wondering whether, and leave it open-ended and see how it is, depending on the situation.
And as you're doing that, as you're working with the teams, you have to be really careful that you don't end up becoming the Scrum Master, because what will happen is the team will see you as the expert, and you want the team to be looking at the Scrum Master as the process expert. So you have to be really enabling the Scrum Master and being very careful not to take over that job, because it could happen very, very easily and very quickly if you're not careful. So, you know, you really want to prep yourself Scrum Master and really spend a lot of good time with them to help so that they can be looked at the team can look at them as the process expert. And then you're there just to help, you know, correct things along the way, like Nitin was saying.
Can I ask the next question?
Yes, go ahead,
or when we're done with this topic, I would like to ask a question. What would you recommend to an agile coach or someone who's coming to the team that thinks they're using Scrum, but as you are the only one who had experience with Agile, you realize that they are not using Scrum? The only sign that they're using Scrum is they're using Jira for ticket management. So how would you approach that team to steer them in the right direction, because you realize that's just not Scrum and just not productive at all?
I'll start with this one. Then what I would do is I would just say, let's do Scrum 101 training. You know, basically just set up a 1-hour training session. And I use the excuse to say, yeah, you know, a lot of times the team will say, well, we've been trained already. And I say, well, that's okay. I'd like to just get everybody on the same page. And you know, this is the Scrum, this is a way of doing Scrum that I'm familiar with. And I just want to make sure everybody sees it. And then as you're doing the training, you can just, things that you've noticed that they're doing wrong, you can kind of almost indirectly not say, hey, you know, you guys, look at this, you did this wrong. But you know, they'll start figuring it out. And then, you know, you have to somehow get some kind of baseline down in place without getting everybody all upset. And also, you probably should, before those meetings, is spend a lot of time with the Scrum Master. To me, it sounds to me like the Scrum Master probably was a BA that was put in the job, and you know, they were told to read a book or they were sent to a 2-day class, and it's not really fair. So you have to really give the Scrum Master a chance.
Yeah,
and you have to find out where the Scrum Master's head is.
I'm talking about a situation when there is no such role as Scrum Master, but the team is thinking they're doing Agile Scrum and using technical leads as product owners who do define requirements in daily update meetings, word to word, without having basically any documentation in Jira, and using Jira only as a bug or issue management system.
Yeah, so in that case, basically, they're not doing Scrum. If they don't have a Scrum Master, if they don't have a product owner,
correct.
You have to have the 3 roles. So basically, you have to work with the organization and get those roles filled.
Yeah.
And if they're not willing to fill those roles, my recommendation would be stop calling it Scrum. Just call it, maybe they should do Kanban. But you know, you just have to stop people thinking that they're doing something that they're not. So if the organization doesn't agree to actually fill those roles, then Scrum's not right for you.
Yeah, the organization is not aware because there hasn't been anyone until now, and that's me, who understands that there is no Scrum. So I need to kind of break it for them.
Yeah, so Slava, if I could just supplement, maybe as a coaching stance, you would reveal something, right? There's an interesting quadrant. You could even Google this, and I presented earlier, going from Scrum not to getting a little bit into Scrum buts to Scrum and. And the general philosophy or statement is like, if you say, hey, you know, we're doing Scrum, but our daily Scrum happens every other day. Hey, we're doing Scrum, but we don't have a retrospective every time we end. So every time you hear the but, there's a dysfunction, you know? And it seems like you're doing more of the worst of that, or the Scrum not. You're not doing Scrum. But people are just, you know, a little enthusiastic. They want to do it, which I would still say it's encouraging to hear. And you want to try to ideally move into Scrum and, which is the, hey, we're doing Scrum and our daily Scrum finishes in less than 15 minutes. Hey, we're doing Scrum and our increment is more than what we planned for in the sprint planning, and it was bug free, you know? So there is a spectrum of where people are. And the first thing to do is, if you can, is to reveal some of that in a gentle way. The other thing I'm going to reveal to you is one of my biggest secrets. I am a ninja. I work in the darkness with stealth, which is one of the ways of approaching Agile adoptions. Typically, you see top-down approaches or bottom-up, which is organic coming from teams, and there's stealth, where you're not throwing out formal terms, you're not trying to intimidate anybody, you're kind of empowering others in a subtle way. So, for example, I was seeing some Scrum Masters talking, and they're saying, yeah, let's start the Scrum on a Monday and end it on a Friday. Those are terrible ideas, as you might know. So I said, hey, you know, your product owner said he's going to be out on Friday. He had a toothache. He's going to see the dentist. Do you think we'll be able to close out the sprint items? No. Okay. And isn't there a long weekend holiday coming up next month on a Monday? Do you think we could kind of start the sprint planning that day? No. Oh, maybe we shouldn't start on a Monday. How about, you know, Tuesday or Wednesday? I think that's not a bad idea. Sometimes there's the message, and then there's the messenger. You might be playing a little bit of a dance there. Sometimes you just have to find people who will carry that message forward, and that's just a tip in where you are, and that works for people. So it's a very broad question you're asking, but these are just a few thoughts and stories that I can share and Bob can share.
Yeah, very subliminal approach. I actually like it.
Sure. It's an upward journey. You do have a tough task in front of you based on what I'm hearing. It can be a wonderful journey, very gratifying, but you would have to exercise patience, and you might emerge as someone they will truly respect and look up to. And if you can show the value add over time, I think that'll only be a good thing. But it will be a long journey.
And so Slava, that's the name, correct? Okay.
Yes, Slava, yes.
Okay. And so is the management planning on doing training? Because I guess maybe some of the leading safe training that John has been talking about, right, will be beneficial to them, right? To try and get them into the mindset.
No, management is not aware what's going on. They let it all for project managers. They call everybody project managers who's managing projects to figure out. But I'm kind of would like to, since everybody's saying we're doing Agile, I see that they're not doing Agile, so I kind of want to talk to one of the executives about it, and I already had an initial chat. He's supportive. He doesn't like what's going on currently. There's just too much conversations and like Tetris bricks falling down, and you have little time to find the right place for them. This is what's happening right now. I would like to actually steer them in the right direction, and I think it's a good opportunity for me.
Okay, so I think some of the training might help, but sometimes even after the training, people need support and things don't go as planned. I bet you, just based on what you're describing, you're going to need a little bit more than training, but one step at a time. If you do have your executive supporting an adoption or transformation or training, certainly go for it, but just be aware that you're going to be seen as a change agent. And I'm actually going to challenge you to use your exercise and patience and take the company and your team forward as best as you can.
One question here, Nitin, this is Sunil here. Considering what Slav is saying, isn't safe training something that is not going to help his organization at this point? I remember the discussion we had last month. We had said that only if the organization is adopting safe, then going through the safe training and going through the safe certification, etc., is useful. But looks like his organization is still in the initial stages of the adoption.
Yeah, very initial stages of adoption. Yes, so I think safe might come into a view once. They get more familiar with Agile methodology in general and Scrum, because the organization is big. So I think they would benefit from safe, in the end.
Yeah, and the only reason I
could just respond to
was suggesting that was not that they'll be doing Agile, but just so that the mindset, right? Because you need that mindset from the leadership, right, to understand, because the Agile, right, is a paradigm shift.
Right.
Yes, agree. So if I could just respond to Sunil, that's a very good point. I made an assumption that this team was looking into scaling. Scaling has different flavors. Before SAFE, Les was among the pioneers with Craig Larman, Bus Bodie. Both Bob and I have had training there. There's now the Nexus with Scrum.org. There are other flavors. People grow organically, which I like as well. I am a former SPC, Safe Program Consultant. I had the ability to train people in 2 days and do that. But yeah, I would start with the core of Scrum. Just get fundamentals first before you start cloning the DNA of sheep. If there's a problem with one, you're just going to be multiplying it. I don't know if you remember that movie, I think it was called Multiplicity with Michael Keaton, who figured out a way of cloning himself. It was great. Hey, I can do twice the work now because I've got two of me. But when he cloned the clone, he started acting weird, hitting himself into walls and blabbering, and it got a little messy. So Sunil, you raise an excellent point. If this is an organization looking into venturing into this and maybe getting a little better with at least one team, that would be the way to go before scaling. And I know Bob's got some thoughts as well.
Yeah, because the recommendation is before you even consider scaling, you want to do Scrum right. So if you were just to focus on getting the Scrum teams up and running this year, maybe, I don't even know if they'd be ready by next year to even look at something like SAFe. That's really big.
Yeah, if you have an opportunity to hire an external coach for a little bit, that might help. I went in for an engagement with multiple teams at a data center. One team has said they'd been struggling for about a year and they didn't need any training. They didn't. And I didn't offer any training. I just observed, revealed, course corrected, empowered, and then moved on to other teams there. So they had about 3 teams talking to each other on the same floor. So training is always a plus. It's only going to help. But see if you can at some point also get an external coach, if they'd be willing to get someone in just to see what's going on.
Probably a transformation coach.
Yes, Sunil, you're paying attention.